Live from Arlington, Virginia, this is Transport Topics Newsmakers, the digital interview series that gives you access to candid conversations between industry experts and a veteran reporter.
Sponsored by Idelic.
Here's your host, Dan Ronan.
Welcome to the latest edition of Newsmakers from Transport Topics. I'm pleased to host this conversation with leading figures in the transportation, trucking, freight, and logistics industries. We have a great guest today, and we'll be talking about a very important topic. It concerns safety. Our guest is the just recently retired chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board, Robert Sumwalt, who joins us from his home in South Carolina. Before we begin our conversation with Robert, I want to tell you that Idelic is our sponsor for this edition of Newsmakers. Their leadership has prepared a short message they'd like to convey to all of you. So let's watch this together, and we'll be back on the other side with our guest, Robert Sumwalt, after this message.
How are award-winning fleets managing their drivers? By getting more from the systems they already use. Don't just collect data. Take the next step with the Idelic Safety Suite. Gain full visibility into driver professional development and increase accountability within your fleet by monitoring and sharing relevant driver data between different departments with ease. Prevent crashes, improve driver retention, and get more from your technology with Safety Suite. See more at idelic.com.
Now a little bit about our guest, Robert Sumwalt, and his career. Just a few weeks ago, he retired from the National Transportation Safety Board, serving on that federal safety panel for 15 years, including the last 4 as chairman. He is one of the longest serving members of the NTSB. Prior to coming to the board, he was an airline pilot for 32 years, including 24 years with Piedmont Airlines and then later U.S. Airways. He's also managed the corporate flight department for Scana, a Fortune 500 energy company. He has more than 14,000 hours in the cockpit, and he's type rated in 5 aircraft. He has played also an important role with the Airline Pilots Association, where he chaired that group's Human Factors and Training Group. While at the NTSB, he has been deeply involved in the investigation of dozens of accidents, including aviation, railroad, surface transportation, and pipelines. Robert, thanks for joining us. It's good to chat with you.
Hey, Dan, thanks. It's great to be with you.
Robert, one of the things that I've been most impressed with is in aviation safety in the time that I've been covering it in the last 25 years or so, has been the remarkable improvement made in commercial aviation. As you know, in the 1980s and 90s, when you were flying for U.S. Airways and for Piedmont, it seemed as though every year there was 1 or 2 major commercial crashes with a huge loss of life. But thankfully, the last major aviation accident we had in this country was almost 20 years ago in New York, American Airlines Flight 587. How did this change take place, and what were some of the key aspects that the aviation industry used to really ratchet up their safety and improve it?
Dan, you're right. The major airlines have really done an exceptional job with safety management over the last 2 decades. I will point out, of course, there was the Colgan Air crash up in Buffalo in 2009. That was not a major airline, but more a regional airline. However, nevertheless, it's still been, since February of 2009, since that crash happened, there were 50 fatalities in that one. What have the airlines done? A lot, actually. For one thing, they are monitoring their normal flights. All airplanes, as everybody knows, has these black boxes that are used for crash reconstruction. Well, the airlines figured out a few decades ago that they could monitor the normal flights, the ones that don't crash, and get a lot of data from those flights to see what is working and what is not working. And so that's one major thing. They can look for systemic issues that could lead to crashes, and they can head them off before there's a crash. They also share these data with all of the other airlines in a de-identified manner, so that not just that airline can see where the problems are, but so that all of the airlines can see where the problems are. So the airlines really have done an exceptional job with managing safety over the last few decades.
There also is a self-reporting aspect for pilots as well, to report anonymously when they make a mistake, that they can fill out a form. It's called a NASA form. As you know, Robert, I'm a pilot myself, and I've filled out a NASA form on a couple of occasions when I've goofed up, and it's anonymous. It's not punitive. Is that a good thing?
Absolutely, it's a good thing, and by the same token, the companies, the airlines, are able to see where problems are before they lead to crashes. So I think that also has helped to contribute to the excellent safety record of the major airlines.
Now that we've established the really great work that's being done in aviation, let's flip the coin a little bit. The federal government and the National Safety Council recently reported the number of highway accidents is trending back up, close to 40,000 deaths a year and more than 1 million injuries on our highways. And this happened, as you know, Robert, at a time when traffic volume on our highways diminished because of COVID, but deaths increased about 8%. So it seems as though we're going in the wrong direction here.
Absolutely, the numbers are going the wrong direction on highway, and we've got to get those numbers back down. I mean, what is an acceptable number? Anything other than zero is totally unacceptable. And I think that we as society, unfortunately, have just accepted that people are going to die on the highways, and that's the wrong approach.
Yeah, if we had something like this happening in aviation, where we were having a major accident every day, 5, 6 a week, we'd be, as an industry and as a society, we'd be, as you know from your time on the board, we'd be lighting our hair on fire. We would be so concerned about it.
Absolutely. And, as you pointed out, between 35 and 40,000 deaths each year on the nation's highways, totally unacceptable. The leading factor in that, of course, is impaired driving. About 10,000 lives each year lost due to alcohol impaired driving. And then when you put the impairment from other substances, then that brings it up considerably. So that's one area that we can work on right there.
The NTSB, which you led for 4 years and have been very involved with for much of your career, gets a lot of attention because of its aviation role. You know, you see the investigators out at the scene of an accident with the dark windbreakers and the yellow lettering on the back of their coats. But the NTSB, and I want you to explain this to our viewers, the NTSB does play a very large role in highway accidents, sometimes depending on the size of the accident.
You're right, Dan. Most people would associate the NTSB with aviation accidents, and certainly the NTSB does that, but the board also investigates crashes in all modes of transportation, including highway.
And you also have a role, I understand, in pipelines as well, that there's a pipeline component as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that people are surprised when they hear that we're doing pipeline accidents. And see, I've got my pronouns wrong. I'm still referring to the board as we, which I've left 4.5 weeks ago. But the pipeline is a method of transportation. We're transporting a product through a pipeline, just as we may transport a product on a rail car or through a tank car. So tank car truck. So yes, a pipeline is definitely a mode of transportation for a product. And so therefore, when something happens, the NTSB does get involved in the investigation of that.
I don't know if accept is the right word, but there seems to be, when it comes to automobile accidents and highway accidents, not so much an acceptance, but a resignation that this is just a cost of being a mobile society. You mentioned a couple of moments ago that our goal should be zero, like it is in aviation. And I know there's a group out there called the Road to Zero, which is doing a lot of great things. Why do you think that as a society, there's this resignation that this is just a cost of being a mobile society?
Yeah, I'm not sure why there is that acceptance. There ought to be social outrage that as many people die each year on our nation's roadways. There really should not be any acceptance at all of that.
Do we need a greater enforcement for some of these chronic issues, DWI, reckless driving, speeding? And I'm going to talk about speeding and the like in just a moment in my next question. Texting while driving, I know that that's something that has been a concern of yours as well. And one that keeps hanging around as well, and that includes not wearing seatbelts.
Yeah, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, if we could get the impaired driving down, that would take a good chunk of the fatalities out right there, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 15,000 deaths each year. But then that still leads about 20,000 that are still on the table. And so it really has to be a multidisciplined approach to getting these fatalities, driving these fatality numbers down. Yeah, speeding is definitely an issue. And I know you wanted to talk about that as well.
I do, because one of the things we found during COVID, Robert, was that the situation, we saw people driving at very high speeds, 120, 130 miles per hour. And our truck driving friends, the men and women in the trucking industry, the professional drivers, those commercial drivers, say that it was not uncommon to see, because the roads were a little less crowded, to see drivers driving at a very high rate of speed on highways that normally were pretty packed.
Yeah, the NTSB did a study of speeding, and I know that this doesn't sound horribly profound, but the truth of the matter is that when you drive faster, you're more likely to be in a crash, and when you're in a crash, you're more likely to have severe consequences of being in a crash. As you know, energy is a function of mass and speed. The kinetic energy doubles when the let's see, 1/2 mass times velocity squared. So as the speed increases, the kinetic energy increases by a factor of the square. So I know that doesn't sound very profound to say that speeding is dangerous, but we did find that a significant number of findings which relate to speeding.
Yeah, if you hit that tree going at 40 miles per hour, you've got a chance of a survivable accident with seatbelts on and airbags. You may end up getting banged up or some broken bones, but if you hit that tree at 85 or 90, the outcome is likely to be a lot less good, probably resulting in death or catastrophic injuries that you have to deal with the rest of your life.
Absolutely. That's exactly the point.
What about texting while driving? We hear a lot about from drivers, the professional drivers, the truck drivers that are out there, that they see people texting while driving all the time. And I've told this story on the air before, and I'll tell you this. There was a time a couple of years ago, I was driving in Dallas, and Robert, this is a true story. I saw a guy driving on a very busy highway in the North Dallas suburbs with a face full of shaving cream, all lathered up. And as he got to the stop sign, he was, taking the blade, and, this wasn't an electric job that sometimes you got to cheat and, just run it over your face. He had the whole gamut. And I said, this is just the craziest thing I've ever seen.
Say that one takes the cake right there.
But yeah, I mean, if your appearance is that important to you, or that text is that important to you, you would think it would be a good idea to stop the car, or maybe leave the house 5 minutes earlier after you've run a razor blade over your face and got yourself looking presentable, rather than driving on the Dallas North Tollway. And the highway I'm talking about, driving on the Dallas North Tollway, it's 65 miles an hour with a face full of Barbasol.
Yeah, and we had a saying at the NTSB that no text, no post is that important. And we know, I've met with family members and people themselves who have been, family members who've lost loved ones due to somebody texting or talking on a cell phone. I've met with individuals who have been involved in text or cell phone related accidents. I met a police officer, a woman police officer, who had pulled over somebody for a texting violation. He had already had one texting violation. She had pulled him over, and then she got struck by another car by somebody who was texting. And she was struck at, I think, 30 or 40 miles an hour. It's amazing that she even lived.
Should we make texting in states a primary violation then, that police officers can pull you over and can write you a ticket on the spot? Should that be something that, instead of making it a secondary, you have to be speeding or driving or a reckless matter, and if you happen to be texting, they'll get you for that and as a slap that on as an additional ticket. But should it be a primary violation?
Considering the safety consequences of texting and driving, I think so. I do believe so.
Okay, and I know that this has also been one of the NTSB's top performance issues when it comes to the top 10 list that you put out every year when you were with the board, that they put this list out and make quite a media splash with it and gets a lot of attention, but texting is always up there.
That's true. And distracted driving is an issue that is going to continue to grow. And it is something that we need to really get our handle around. It's not something that needs to be done. People don't have to speak on the phone. People don't have to text while they're driving.
And of course, at the federal level, when it comes to the trucking industry, this is a major violation. You can get yourself in a lot of trouble for texting if you're driving a commercial vehicle and you're stopped by a law enforcement officer. There's a potential for some big fines and, possibly a suspension of your driver's license. And to a commercial truck driver losing their CDL, that's a big deal.
Yes, it is. And I sit on the porch these warm summer afternoons watching, and there's a delivery truck for a major company that a few weeks ago I saw the driver pulling around through the cul-de-sac talking on a cell phone, and it kind of makes me wonder what's going on with that company there.
Now, speaking of which, many corporations have made it if you drive a company car for their particular business or you're on company business, that you can't use a cell phone. If you're going to text or send an email, you have to pull off and the vehicle has to be stopped. Good idea? Is this something that the corporate world should be encouraging?
I certainly think so. And you really show your commitment to safety by coming up with such a company policy. We did have at the NTSB, they still have it. I'm no longer part of we, but the company policy, the agency policy was that if you're on company business, agency business, or if you're using an agency cell phone, you may not talk and drive at the same time. And I think that there's huge liability that if you're a company that has great visibility, we can think of a lot of companies that have, companies that we all recognize the name on. And let's say you're Amazon, for example, and one of your drivers is talking on the phone and he runs into a school bus and injures, possibly kills some students. What do you think the liability of Amazon is going to be in that case? If they did not actively practice enforcing their company cell phone ban. So I think there's huge liability there. The National Safety Council has really come out with some good products, some sample company policies that somebody could just basically cut and paste. And they also have guidance on what the liability is for companies who don't actively enforce such company policies. Because it ultimately goes back not to the driver, but to the company.
And that goes back to the corporate safety department, making it so that this particular policy is understood by everybody, from the person who's working on the floor to the CEO, that this is the policy and this is the rule and this is just the way we work.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Robert, as we mentioned at the top of Newsmakers here, the aviation industry has really done a great job in terms of lowering the number of deaths in its particular field over the last 20, 25 years. How can we in the surface transportation area start to use some of these changes that aviation made, and they were painful changes in some respects, to start to make surface transportation that much safer? What can we do?
Well, yeah, if we could figure that out, and actually there are things that can be done. We can start with the corporate owners and how are they monitoring what's going on with their fleets. I think that's an important thing. We're not necessarily looking to spy on the individual. In the airline business, when I talked about these programs that monitor their normal flights, their routine flights, they're not looking specifically to see how a particular pilot operated his or her airplane. They're looking at the system to see what systemic problems are out there. And by the same token, the commercial fleets could be doing the same thing. They could look to see how their fleets are being operated. And I think that's one way that we can improve transportation safety or surface transportation safety right there. Go ahead, please, Dan.
More cameras, more analytics. I know that in aviation there was a lot of concern about putting audio and video in the cockpit because of privacy concerns. But are you a proponent then of more? And you're also an airline captain, retired airline captain. Are you more of a proponent of putting more cameras in the trucks and more cameras in the airplanes as well?
Yeah, nobody wants to have cameras, truth be told, but the NTSB has a longstanding recommendation that there should be video image recorders in the cockpit. I do support that because there are proper, in the case of aviation, there are protections in place to make sure that video doesn't get out. But as far as the privacy concerns, when you think about it, Dan, in someone's workplace, there is no expectation of privacy. If you're using a company computer, that's not your computer, that's the company's computer. If you have a no alcohol policy and somebody opens your desk in the office and there's a bottle of alcohol in there, a bottle of whiskey in there, are you violating that person's privacy? No, because that's company property. So I think we've kind of got to get over the notion of when you're in your workplace, there really should be no expectation. There is no expectation of privacy. And so that's just the way that is. And I know that's an unpopular position, but I think that's the legal position, is that there really is no expectation of privacy in the workplace.
And in the case when you were flying for the two airlines that you flew for, or in the case of a truck driver, you have lives that are literally hanging in the balance. You have 160 or 140 passengers behind the cockpit door that you're responsible for. A truck driver who's driving a large tractor trailer, they're going down the highway at 60, 65 miles per hour. And there are four-wheel vehicles all around them. And you're in both those cases, you're responsible for the lives of those folks, either in the back or around your truck.
Yeah, when drug and alcohol testing got introduced for airline pilots, we were all scared about it. But I finally came to grips with that when I realized that the public's right to have a drug and alcohol-free flight deck crew, pilots, their right, their expectation to have a drug and alcohol-free pilots flying their airplane far exceeded my expectation of any privacy there. So I got over that real quickly. It was rammed down our throats anyway, so why pitch a fit about it? But yeah, I think we've got to think about the greater good, actually.
Speaking of which, since you brought up the issue of drugs and alcohol, I want to bring this up and chat with you about this for a couple of minutes. Many states across the country have decriminalized the recreational use of marijuana, and there's now talk of doing this at the federal level as well. We all know that airline pilots and commercial truck drivers are covered under federal laws in terms of using marijuana or substance abuse and alcohol. There's very very clear regulations about this. What's your take on the decriminalization issue?
Well, the actual decriminalization would be left up to the respective law enforcement agencies. In this case, the various states are doing that. That's up to them. But from a safety point of view, I do have great concerns. As I mentioned, we are seeing a large number of impaired driving fatalities and a large number of injuries due to impaired driving. We normally think of alcohol when we think of impaired driving, but as we see other drugs, marijuana becoming decriminalized, we can expect to see more fatalities.
In a case of where drivers may be, because also one of the things we don't have in the case of alcohol, we do have pretty sophisticated monitoring systems to know a person's level of impairment because of testing. Whereas with marijuana, it would seem to be a long way out in terms of the testing. It's not like you can do the testing that an officer does, or go into your local CVS and Walgreens and get a test to see if your son or daughter was smoking a joint with their friends at their house or something. Who knows?
That's right. And one of the things that has been shown is the level of impairment cannot necessarily be detected by the amount of, in the case of THC, by the amount of THC that's in your system, because of a number of factors. So you're right. With alcohol, there's pretty much a direct correlation between the amount of the BAC and the amount of impairment. With THC, not necessarily so.
As you know, the trucking industry in the last several years has seen a very large number of so-called nuclear verdicts, in excess of $10 million in terms of jury verdicts. Back to that question that we started the conversation about earlier, how can the trucking industry and individual companies establish that culture of safety that makes them less vulnerable to litigation? If you were going into a trucking company today, what would be the 3 or 4 things you'd tell a fleet owner operator? If you want to keep yourself out of the jackpot, these are things I would do.
Yeah, and strictly from a safety culture point of view and not necessarily from a legal point of view, I certainly would, there are various things that I would want to look at to show whether or not they truly have a safety culture. I would not necessarily ask the people at the head of the company what their safety culture is. I'd want to go out and see what's happening on the front lines and ride with some of these drivers and see what's going on there. I would want to see, do they have what we call a just culture? And by just culture, if someone reports a safety problem or reports that they screwed up and they self-report that to the company, what would the company's reaction be? Would they, if it was an honest mistake, would they want to punish that person, or would they want to say, you know what, we really appreciate you letting us know that, and we're now going to consider putting in place measures to keep it from happening throughout the rest of the system. So there are a number of things that I would want to look at in terms of the operation of that organization.
Back to that FAA NASA form then, where you self-report and say, I did this, and they use the data to get an idea if there's a chronic problem at an airport or a facility or with a particular type of airplane, so we can narrow these things down.
Absolutely. That system has been tremendously beneficial in terms of finding out where problems are before they lead to serious problems in the nation's airspace.
Got about 3 minutes left, Robert, in our conversation. And this next question is one, it's pretty open-ended, and we could probably spend 30 minutes talking about this. Professional truck drivers will sometimes point out that they are professionals. And in many cases, 75, 85% of the time, the accidents that occur on highways are caused by people who are in the passenger cars. What can we do as a society so that trucks and cars can share the road? Because this is different than aviation, where you have air traffic controllers monitoring your flight and they're separating airplanes in the sky. We don't have that luxury on the ground. What can we do as a society so trucks and cars drivers can get along a little better.
Yeah, well, I want to follow up to what you did say, and you pointed out that these drivers are professionals, and I want to thank the professional truck drivers because they're vitally needed, and we know that that they are the lifeline to our nation's economy. So, thank you for the good work that you're doing. That's like you said, Dan. That's a question that could be discussed, or an answer that could be discussed for 30 minutes. But I do think that it's important to fatigue is a major factor in crashes, distractions, impaired driving. So those are some of the big ticket items right there that if we could eliminate or drive down those, we are going to improve roadway safety.
You lived and worked in Washington, D.C. for many years with the NTSB, and we're very close now to getting a large $100 billion worth of money pumped into our infrastructure. Will this help to improve the deteriorating conditions of our roads and highways? If we can get them improved, will this also be a factor in improving safety?
Absolutely. That stimulus bill or infrastructure bill needs to be passed. And it looks like the Senate has done that. Let's wait and see what the House does.
Last question. You've been in transportation your entire career, 45 plus years in this particular field. As you depart the NTSB, as you said, you recently retired a little more than a month ago. What's next on the horizon for you? What will we be hearing from you?
Yeah, I'm wondering if you have asked my wife that question because she keeps asking me that same question. I don't know what the next chapter looks like, but I do want to take a few months off and then hopefully get back and get re-engaged.
So we haven't heard the last from you yet. There's another chapter to be written.
Well, we sure hope so. I think I've got a lot of fire left in this belly. And by the way, the belly has increased over the last few years. But yeah, I'm very passionate about transportation safety and would love to get back in and make some contributions. But meanwhile, I'm just trying to do that honey-do list that got neglected over the years while I was commuting back and forth to Washington over those years.
Well, 15 years is a long time to spend in any job, and certainly in a high-profile role like the NTSB. We want to thank you for doing that. That certainly it says a lot about your commitment to transportation safety, and thanks for doing that. Thanks for serving our government and our American people so long.
Been such an honor, Dan, to be appointed by 3 U.S. presidents. Such an honor, and I appreciate the opportunity to be on your show. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert. In closing, we want to thank Robert Sumwalt for joining us and being so generous with his time to answer our questions. We also wish to thank our sponsor, Idyllic, for making this Transport Topics Newsmaker possible. We appreciate their fine support. Going forward, we are planning more of these Newsmakers in the near future, and we will have an announcement very soon about when the next webcast will take place and who our guest will be. Also, this webcast will be available for on-demand viewing. Go to ttnews.com for more information and how you can watch our interview with Robert Sumwalt. I'm Dan Ronan with Transport Topics and ttnews.com. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for joining us today. For more information on future episodes, visit ttnews.com. This has been Transport Topics Newsmakers.